The tribunal says that, in essence, that there were two people particularly, Aidan Phelan, who was a business associate of both Dennis O'Brien and who knew Michael Lowry as well, and the late David Austin, who was involved with fundraising for Fine Gael, that these two people at various stages became the conduits for payments to Michael Lowry, both in terms of money transactions and in terms of property transactions. But the tribunal summarises all this by saying that the nature of these transactions was clandestine, and that there were repeated attempts to falsify and present a misleading picture to the tribunal about what was actually going on. So then if you go through the transactions, they're all very, very complicated, but to try to simplify them, the tribunal basically finds that at one stage a sum of £147,000 was transferred from an account of Dennis O'Brien's via Aidan Phelan and others to the benefit of Michael Lowry. That's one transaction. Now they said that this transaction was subsequently reversed back because there was a fear. This happened around the time that the Moriarty tribunal was being established, or the McCracken tribunal was being established, and there was a fear that it might have been disclosed or it might have come into the public domain. There were subsequent transactions after Michael Lowry left office when he ceased to be a minister, and there are two in particular. They relate to a property in Mansfield in Derbyshire in the UK and another property in Cheadle. And essentially there was a sum of 300,000 sterling. And the tribunal says that the source of this money was an account held by Dennis O'Brien in the Credit Suisse First Boston Bank in London. And that effectively this money was routed to provide both part of the purchase price for the Mansfield property and a deposit on the Cheadle property. So effectively those transactions were all directed towards Michael Lowry's benefit, and the tribunal says they had their origins in Dennis O'Brien's accounts.
Right. Now, pardon me, we'll hear presently from our chief news correspondent, Charlie Bird, the reactions today of Dennis O'Brien and Michael Lowry. Dennis O'Brien insisting that he never made any payment to Michael Lowry in his capacity as a government minister, and that may be an important line in that.
This relates to the subsequent transactions that happened, the ones I'm referring to in Britain, which were long after Michael Lowry left.
Right, but before we hear about the reaction, let's just jog our memory, because on the 14th of January last year, that's in 2010, I spoke to Michael Lowry, Tipperary North TD, on this programme. At that stage, he was saying the tribunal was intent on destroying his character and shredding the reputation of civil servants.
I'm absolutely satisfied that when the final report comes out, if it's based on facts, if it's based on an evidentiary trail, if it's based on the evidence of civil servants and legal people who have given evidence to the tribunal, then the tribunal is not in a position to find anything wrong or improper in the issuing of the second mobile licence.
As you say, they went through your accounts, your family's accounts, your dead mother's accounts, your brother's, your children's accounts, and got nada. Nothing, as you tell us. So why are you worried?
I'm worried because, Sean, all the instances coming from the tribunal is that the tribunal are saying that in some shape or form that there was collusion between the senior civil servants in the Department of Finance and the Department of Communications, and that in some way they conspired with me to grant benefit to Dennis O'Brien's ESAT Digiphone consortium. It never happened. It was an impossibility for it to happen. I didn't even attempt to make it happen, and the senior officials in the department have given that as evidence, but that evidence seems to be blithely ignored by those who are working on behalf of the tribunal.
Right, so that's Michael Lowry speaking in January of last year, and again in an extract from one of the summaries, the executive summary, chapter 61, it's in part 2, page 1112. Overall, the tribunal found Mr. Lowry's evidence in this regard, that's in regard to his interventions, formulaic, evasive and unhelpful. His evidence of having had no other role than as a recipient of outline information brought to him by Mr. Brennan was wholly inconsistent and irreconcilable with the documentary trail and with the evidence of departmental witnesses, and the tribunal has no hesitation in rejecting it. Now, Charlie Bird, as I say, is here. Charlie, statements from Dennis O'Brien and Michael Lowry. Let's hear, first of all, what Michael Lowry is saying this time.
Well, Michael Lowry, if the report is scathing in its criticism of Michael Lowry is also scathing in his criticism of the tribunal, and in particular of the judge, Mr. Justice Moriarty. He says that he totally rejects the findings of this report, which he says are factually wrong and deliberately misleading. He says Moriarty has outrageously abused the tribunal's ability to form opinions which are not substantiated by evidence or fact. For example, in relation to the licence, he says it was not possible for me to interfere with the licence process without the collusion of up to 18 civil servants. And he said it is preposterous of Moriarty to form an opinion in his report that all the civil servants, all the consultants had effectively lied under oath. He said that during this prolonged hearing into the licence, not a single witness gave evidence that he had interfered in any way with the process and that he had done anything wrong.
Right, and again he goes on to say it's ludicrous of Mr. Justice Moriarty to state that the government of the day were in any way misled.
Yeah, and he also, Sean, basically what he's saying is that the Moriarty Tribunal, Mr. Justice Moriarty, that they were basically trying to fit a theory which they had into this report. From the outset, he says that Moriarty was biased and had given 14 years working to prove a theory that the licence was improperly granted. He says it beggars belief now that he would ignore the extensive evidence given to the tribunal, which clearly confirms that I did not in any way influence the decision of the independent project team. He says Moriarty's credibility has been shattered because of his selective approach to the evidence during the private and public inquiry. And he says, I have long believed, and you could, in the report, he says, I have long believed that because of the time and the massive expense involved at the tribunal and the final report would try to justify its existence. In other words, what he's saying is that the whole tribunal was right and was trying to justify its existence.
We'll come back in a moment about what Dennis O'Brien's reaction, but Brian, you want to make some...
Just in relation to what the tribunal then says of Michael Lowry, because at the end of chapter 61, in its overview and concluding observations, it says the tribunal has been led to find that Mr. Lowry, in the course of his ministerial office as Minister for Transport, Energy and Communications, by his acts and decisions, conferred a benefit on Mr. or Dennis O'Brien, who was the source of money in accounts held in the name of and for the benefit of Mr. Lowry.